We got a lot to discuss. Have you all seen Nosferatu yet? If you have, let me know. I haven't been able to go out and see it yet. I've had like ammonia for the past year. That's a joke. It's been about a month, but I haven't been able to see it because of that. So apparently the people like it. All right. Enough with the bits. We got to talk about the new Ethel Cain record. Now, let me explain myself here because this is gonna be ran with, but I've never been a big fan of Ethel Cain's music generally. Like around the time that Preacher's Daughter came out, it just wasn't really a sound I was necessarily looking for. And so as a result of that, I just never got around to really diving into the record fully. And now years later, I just kind of haven't felt a strong like compulsion or like need to listen to it. That doesn't mean that I don't necessarily appreciate what Ethel Cain has been able to kind of do culturally, especially around the time of that record. All I'm saying is that just if I were to listen to it at any point up until now, my ears would have been closed. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm kind of like a ears open kind of guy. I like having my ears open. I like being able to hear. That being said, I was a fan of Ethel, specifically her YouTube career. That's not a joke, actually. I'm a big fan of what I like to affectionately call yapathon content, which is basically, by my definition, just people who talk about things that they like on YouTube for a very long amount of time. Like, I spent 30 minutes listening to a slow chord musician talk about a Zelda Switch Lite that they bought, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't know. I get that kind of content suggested to me personally all the time, and I'm just kind of a big fan of that stuff because I just love hearing people talk about random stuff that they really care about. So all of that out of the way, you're probably asking, hey, why are you talking about the new Ethel Cain then? Why are you talking about it? And you see, I never really had a strong initial interest in this record when it was first announced because like, the fuck are my dogs barking over? Just because of the fact that I didn't really have a strong feeling towards her work one way or another. So I was just like, okay, this will come out. It'll be cool for the culture and I will just kind of ignore it and move on with my life. But that being said, and this is crucial, I am a big fan of weirdo bullshit. So when talk started coming out about this record, I was really kind of taken aback personally because I was hearing like, oh, it's gonna be weird and creepy and it's gonna mess up like the fan base, it's gonna alienate the fan base, and I was like, wait, something might be up here, you guys. Something might be up. But at that point, that was kind of the last I had heard of this record overall up until the release, outside of like the occasional tweet here and there from people that I follow. And that led up until release. The morning that the record came out, I had just a giant fucking nightmare. And I woke up at like 4 in the morning and was just kind of laying in bed, unable to fall asleep. And then I checked my phone and everybody that I care about is not shutting up about the new Ethel Cain. Euboa had made posts about it. Annie is Undead had made posts about it. So many people at this point had made just so many different posts and were talking about this thing like it was God's gift to experimental weirdo music Earth. So at that point I said, you know what, fuck it. I'm barely going to be able to sleep anyway at this point, so I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna play this thing. I'm gonna lay in bed and I'm gonna play this thing. I'm not sure if you guys have seen like that one bit where it's like the photo of like Squidward just like in the bed, headphones in and all that bullshit. You can imagine the vibes of waking up from a nightmare at like 4 in the morning and then playing the Ethel Cain and just staring at the fucking ceiling. Now keep in mind, the main reason why I wanted to listen to it in the first place, beyond just seeing a lot of people talk about it, was because before I decided to full on just listen to the thing, I went over to the like Instagram announcement post for the record saying like, hey, it's out, and I saw that Midwife and Vivia Melancholia were featured on this thing. 1 second. This is one of my favorite singer-songwriter records of all time. This is a collab record between the two of them, Midwife, Vivia Melancholia. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that second name right. If I'm not, I'm so sorry. But this record is incredible. It's called Orb Weaving, and I was such a big fan of this thing. So seeing that the two of them were featured on this thing, hearing that apparently this was like a drone ambient power electronics kind of bullshit, I was like, wait one gosh darn second now. We gotta have a conversation.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
We gotta talk about this, right? And more specifically, I feel like there are two very distinct different discussions that we need to have about this project. And those are cultural discussions and thematic discussions. Basically, the two core elements of how this project is affecting people, I feel, are what it says about the way that we consume art. And in addition to that, the literal thematic elements of this project, what it discusses, and how we can kind of go about that. So I want to start off talking just the scene, right? Because talking about this record for the past few days, first and foremost, I really need to emphasize that talking about this record has been so fun. Like I said, so many cool people that I follow have been talking about this thing. I've been talking about this thing. I made like constant posts on that like release morning about it, just because there's so much weirdness to have with what this project does. What do I mean by that? Ethel Cain is very much kind of in a singer-songwriter pocket, culturally speaking, up until today. Or not today, but this rough period of time. She's very much kind of fallen into the camp of like TikTok, Taylor Swift isms of the world at large. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either. So all that is to say that, like, culturally speaking, Ethel has very much been in that camp, which basically creates this weird parallel universe in which you now have thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fans of TikTok, Taylor Swift-ish kind of music, all of a sudden being exposed to the most weirdo experimental stuff that has really ever permeated the mainstream like this in at least the time during which I have been around to experience music presently. Now keep in mind, I also don't have any issues with people enjoying that kind of music. I think that that kind of music can be really solid. But what that brings me to is one of the biggest issues I have had with the discussion around this record so far. So in one pocket, you have these fans of like the kind of TikTok music, Taylor Swift pocket kind of whatever. And I don't say that as like an insult to those people either. However you want to engage with music is however you want to engage with music. If you find joy in shit, I'm happy for you. But you have that pocket of people who have a subsidiary pocket in which they feel as though they're almost kind of betrayed by Ethel Cain in a certain regard, where they stayed up forever and ever hoping to get a Preacher's Daughter 2, and that did not happen. So they're upset about that. And then you go over to like, and this is what I've been seeing the most of, which is people complaining about that subsidiary of a subsidiary of people who feel betrayed by it. Like, you have people on Twitter talking about like how Ethel Cain should be legally allowed to murder all of her TikTok fans, and it's like, okay, that is funny, but whoa, let's settle down now, okay? But it is still funny. Sorry. My point with this is that I feel that people are missing one of the core components as to what makes this record so good for what it is. And it is that it is a celebration of experimental soundscapes. It is basically taking all of these very underground niches, all of these sounds, all of these sonic ideas that barely ever permeate any listening experience for any musician with over like 1 million monthly Spotify listeners. And it's platforming that. That is the coolest to me. So it's like, while you guys are out there on Twitter talking about like how you wish you could smash the heads in of anyone who rocks with American Teenager, I'm just stoked that I can like see an Ethel Cain fan in person. They can tell me they're an Ethel Cain fan and I can be like, yo, dude, you need to check out Giles Corey. Like, for every single person out there who's maybe pissed off by this record, there are like 5 more who are going to find experimental experimental music and get into the music space because of this record. This is Brat for the traumatized. So it's like between stuff from last year going into this year, for example, like the Kendrick Drake beef, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Between Brat having this kind of like pop revitalization, between that Nosferatu remake, I feel as though we've kind of never been in a better place culturally for art than right now. The people care about what they're engaging with. Like, it's so easy, I feel, for people to get caught up in the feeling that every single piece of art is very content brained these days. And that's made so much worse by like the evil bullshit that Spotify has been on lately. It's made so much worse by people within music spaces who intentionally grift into music spaces in order to make a profit. Tom McDonald, I'm looking at you. But what records like these prove to me is that genuinely more than ever, people care about what they're engaging with. And as someone who makes art, as someone who cares about art, as someone who thinks that art is cool, that makes me so goddamn happy. You have no idea. Like, so many people these days truly believe that media analysis is completely dead. But in actuality, while that might be true for some people, there will always be an intrinsic desire for quality art within music spaces and just artistic spaces generally. The people want to see stuff that experiments, that pushes the boundaries of what we can feel through art. And above all else, they want to see things that can alter the perspectives of ourselves towards the world as a whole. So in that sense, through just a cultural lens, I am so happy that this record exists. So that is the cultural conversation. Let's have the thematic conversation. Period piece gothic horror is back on the menu. So much of this record just perfectly encapsulates this feeling of trauma expressed through the lens of religion. I know I keep joking about like Nosferatu and stuff, but like this record feels really inspired by Robert Eggers. Like I said, I haven't seen Nosferatu yet, but he is still one of my favorite directors, if not my favorite horror director ever. And I've seen The Witch and The Lighthouse. One thing that really struck me about this record in particular is basically its commitment to absurdist horror, much in the same way that Robert Eggers is able to pull off in a lot of his, especially his earlier works. I haven't seen his other two. For example, you kind of have like this hypersensuality aspect to so much of the record, but also it's contrasted with the literal sound palette of the thing, which in my opinion essentially presents a lot of those ideas in a way that doesn't make it appealing, but rather almost neutral. It like neutralizes the perspective, and in that sense kind of like opens up the door for it to feel gross and weird and absurdist and almost alien in a kind of cosmically funny sense. Going back to Robert Eggers and sort of linking my thought process here finally, I'm reminded a lot of like the one scene from The Lighthouse where the dude just like goes in on a mermaid that doesn't exist, and you sort of see this element and this guy losing his mind, and the end result of it just sort of culminates into this like hilarious but depraved and insane and scary bullshit. You kind of can't help but laugh, but are laughing because of how unnerved you are by the situation. Getting away from that aspect with the hypersensuality of it all, and more so just the absurdism in general, you also have moments like The Witch. The whole plot of that movie kicks off because you have a family that gets kicked out of the Pentecostal colony for being too religious. That is fucking hilarious, but scary as hell. So when you know that the movie called The Witch is about a witch, and you can assume that they're going to get attacked by the witch, the horror comes in not just from the witch, but because you now know this family will go to the most extreme lengths in order to preserve their connection with God. And so that leads to this existential terror as to not necessarily what the witch is going to do to the family, but what the family is going to do to themselves because of this witch. In that same way, the literal lengths of these songs, the discussions that are being had within these songs, and so much of the sonic palette that can like shock you or scare you or just be unnerving comes off in this absurdist comedic lens that puts you even more on edge than it would otherwise. If I do have any complaints about this record, first of all, I do feel as though outside of its like cultural relevance, just in terms of numbers and what that means, I do feel as though it sometimes lacks in originality and therefore makes it hard to kind of stand out from the rest of the experimental crowd. So like if you're a fan of like the singer-songwriter stuff and you're just now experiencing this record for the first time, it's like, whoa, this is a whole new fucking world. Holy shit, I love music. When you're kind of in my boat, I feel like a lot of points during this record can be almost underwhelming because of the fact that these are sonic ideas that you might have heard before previously. I think that the biggest example of this is the song Pool Drone, which reminds me a lot of like Lingua Ignota, specifically Sinner Get Ready, to the point where it's almost kind of uncanny. So it's moments like that where I'm like, okay, this is cool, this is solid, but what about this song is going to make me want to specifically listen to this instead of just like Perpetual Flame of Centralia? Going in even further on my criticisms with some of these drone tracks here, I do wish that some of them were more varied at different points in time. For example, I do think that though the intro track to this record is great, I do feel like at a lot of points, especially towards the first several minutes when that like tape recorder stops and you're just kind of left hanging there, I do feel like that kind of takes a lot longer than it really needed to. And I mean, that's something I'm kind of guilty of as well in my own like ambient bullshit. For example, I think that the track like Atonement off of my record takes way too long to get to the point as well. All that is to say that I feel like drone and ambient and dark wave kind of music is easy to make, hard to master, and this record comes very, very, very close to mastering it, but just at some points could have been improved upon and could have just had a bit more sonic variation here and there to really just build that immersion as well as it could have. But really though, it's the moments here on this record that blend Ethel's like classic singer-songwriter sound with a lot of these darker droney elements that really make for some of the biggest standouts of the entire record. There are tracks on this record that remind me of Planning for Burial, and that blows my mind. So like the more and more that I listen to this, the more and more that I am excited for the musicians that I've been listening to who are in this kind of space but haven't been uncovered by the mainstream yet. The more and more excited I get that people genuinely seem to care about artistic meaning and merit. And perhaps most importantly, the more and more excited I get that goth horror is back on the menu, baby. I mean, I didn't think that that could happen in a post-Twilight multiverse, but here we are.